This video is brought to you by the parents who don't want to parent properly and pushes the liability to the content creators. Thank God SAO is a PG-13 show. Episode 7 of Sword Art Online Alicization War of Underworld takes us back in time. Last week everyone was so determined to hate on Renly and I was urging you to wait one more week, and I'm glad the anime portrayed things nicely on his end. I got things to clarify on that aspect, as many of you are asking things like how did Renly remember his past if he was synthesized. So to answer your questions and more, welcome everyone, it's me Gamerturk, your most reliable source of Sword Art Online information with Alicization Explained, featuring War of Underworld episode 7, Brand of a Failure, because Crunchyroll's title for the episode is simply wrong. As always, timestamps to individual plot points are in the description as well as the pinned comment for easy navigation, but to give you a quick rundown, we got quite the accurate adaptation this week, but while the impact of the first half was very solid, the second half kinda faded away. To give basic examples, yes, Berkuli's act was anticlimactic in the novels as well, but the scene was not about the act, but rather the build-up and payoff, for example. And Alice's scene suffered from the usual light show over context syndrome Alicization Anime has suffered a lot since its inception, but if I'm being honest, I'm just enjoying the saltiness of the so-called fanboys who think Kirito is a god at this point, and I'm glad those people will hopefully drop the series eventually and stop being toxic fanboys. But if you're new to my explained series, what I do here is essentially provide you all the vital information on characters, events, action, lore from the source material, light novels, things that the anime did not convey properly or just did not have the time to, so you can still see the full picture. So make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to not miss any of the details in the upcoming weeks and gain an immunity shield against the pawns of Emperor Vecta swiftly spreading misinformation and uncontrolled spoilers like a pack of foxes. But then again, if you want to read the books for yourselves for the amazing experience, Amazon and Book Depository affiliate links are in the description and an Knowledge Stasia awaits you there. Starting with the detailed summary, Episode 7 adapted from Sword Art Online Volume 16, Alicization Exploding's Chapter 18, Midway Part 2 to Midway Part 3. I personally was expecting to cover a bit more ground this week, but I won't complain as they let Renly have half of the episode to himself. But before we head into the actual contents, much like the last episode, there are minor changes here and there, and that is not really the fault of the anime, but rather the way War of Underworld is written. Especially Chapter 18 in Volume 16, what we're adapting right now, is notoriously fragmented in the way it was written. There are moments where the perspective and the scene simply changes every single page, so the anime naturally undergoes some changes here and there to remain consistent with its scenes. As a result, I will not dwell too much on these changes as they are more narrative-oriented changes than contextual ones. The episode begins with a small anime original scene, the one that I enjoy actually, the one that does not break the continuity but rather adds to the ongoing narrative. Fizel and Linel's rush back to the support tents guarded by a minor supply defense group that Kosogi, the Mountain Goblins group, has reached via their smokescreen. And again, even for this short set piece, you can see how much of a difference a proper animation director makes. Tetsuya Takeuchi was in charge of this short Zelnel sequence, and goddamn, it's nice to see things actually move rather than watching a slideshow or watching some light effects do stuff. This scene right here is properly choreographed, and on top of it, it does make sense within the narrative itself, unlike those stupid Alo scenes, how the twins already know Renly is a failure of a knight and how they try to save as many people as they can. I can also talk about how it's kinda sad that Alicization Anime has set up a bar where we are genuinely surprised when we get even the shortest of good action sequences, but I'll leave that to the opinion section at the end. Next up we get the Renly scenes. Now, despite what you saw, the anime really does downplay Renly's situation here. In the anime, despite being adapted very well, it more gives you the idea that he's scared of the enemies, whereas what he's actually scared is taking lives, whether enemies or allies, due to the past that he does not remember. But yeah, before I entangle myself in the constantly switching scenes and perspectives of the light novels, let me just follow the anime here. Before we get to Renly's flashback, first off in the novels, Fizel and Linel did properly confront the coward knight after the twins killed the first goblin who entered the room in an attempt to get him back to his feet with some tough love, which Renly simply refuted and told them to leave him alone and do what they want outside. This part the anime has skipped. And only then Renly first remembers the time he was put back into cryosleep by Quinella and Chudelkin. This is him actually remembering these memories. Why am I highlighting that here? He is actually remembering stuff? You'll see soon enough. With all the talk about being a failure here, you should start realizing how much Crunchyroll butchered the title of this episode when they went with Stigma of the Disqualified instead of the title we translated as SAO Wikia, Brand of a Failure, since nothing here is about a stigma on a disqualified person, it's literally the brand of failure put on Renly. Also to clarify, Quinella states that Renly is being put to cryosleep for quote-unquote punishment, but that's a harsh way of putting it. Knights are not really put to sleep for punishment, they are put to sleep for maintenance, and that is exactly what she's doing to Renly. If you watch Meet Renly Synthesis 27 video we did at SAO Wikia, that is shortly before Alice becomes an Integrity Knight, while Quinella did intend to attempt fixing Renly. Once a new and more skilled prodigy arrives, Quinella simply doesn't put any priority to fixing him and kinda forgets about him later on. So once again, I mention this quite regularly in general, don't get caught up on the acts and word choices of certain individuals, because there are times where the words are simply acts of a character. We'll talk about that in the future episodes as well, especially if the anime omits inner monologues of Alice in future episodes, because you'll see her acting as a proud knight all the time among other things, but she is more shaken than any other people out there. The next scene they adapted impressively. As the one lone goblin walks in, you can see Tiza and Ronya trying to protect Kirito despite being completely incapable, and they even animated the veins in Kirito's hands trying to grasp the sword tightly, both of which affects Renly deeply. And we get to see some flashbacks from Renly from his past life before becoming an Integrity Knight. Now, these scenes have confused a lot of people, and rightfully so, because as most of you are probably aware, one of the key things about Integrity Knights is that they don't remember their pasts, and Renly here is no exception. In the novels, Renlys Past is provided by the omniscient narrator and is explicitly made clear that it is not Renly remembering all of these. Much like all the other Integrity Knights, he has incredibly blurry fragments in his mind about the past, which is the cause of his inability to fight, but he does not know that since he does not remember anything. The first scene from the past is the 4 Empire Unification Tournament, where Renly and his friend made it to the final round together. However, for the first time in their life, their heated sword fight ends with an unexpected result, as the sword of Renly's friend breaks and causes Renly to accidentally kill him in the process. And before you ask, that is not covered under the taboo index. The two are simply dueling in a competition mandated by the Axiom Church, and while killing is still not allowed, or rather not preferred, the nature of this being an accident is pretty clear. In fact, you would know how accidents can happen if the anime had adapted the Zakaria chapter, but hey, I have an entire video covering that chapter in detail, so you can check that if you want more information. It's pretty much the same case as Alice accidentally falling into the Dark Territory. However, in Alice's case, there was no reliable argument to be made, whereas in Renly's case, the entire stadium is like... There are witnesses, including Axiom Church personnel among others who are overseeing the tournament. Also do remember, when two people officially agree to a duel, the outcome is not important either, which you should see back in episode 8 of the Human Realm arc, when Volo and Kirito went into the duel with their real weapons, knowing full well the other could easily end up dying. So I hope that clarifies all the little confusions you may have had on this scene. Going into a duel allows you to kill your opponent in a sense. Fueled by the bravery of Fizel and Linel, who were outside killing dozens upon dozens of goblins, the two inept trainees flimsily holding their swords against the new goblin who arrived, and the final nail in the coffin was when Renly realized Kirito's hands moving, trying to grasp the swords. Renly suddenly felt a rush and instinctively drew his blades to kill off the sole goblin threatening the trainees and Kirito, and once he did, he completely broke down upon realizing that he has killed off a creature he had taken alive. While he didn't remember his past life, taking the life of his friend had crushed Renly on a mental level in a way that a simple memory wipe would not fix. And upon killing the goblin, he was going through the same pain over and over and over again, but something was different this time around. While the gratitude of the two trainees were warm and kind, his heart was still aching in a way. But he shook once again when he heard more goblins approaching from the outside of the tent, and he had no choice. He had to endure the pain, if not for himself, for the sake of the two trainees and the vegetable they are protecting trying to fight back. And well, now that you know, Renly did not really break free of his shackles exactly when he headed out, the rest plays out perfectly accurate, and once again, the difference a proper animation director makes. The Renly scenes were directed by Yoshihiro Kanno, and goddamn, they are beautifully choreographed as expected, but we'll talk about that in the opinions bit at the end. I really love the detail when Renly grabs his blades, completely thrown off control by Kosogi here. Normally being divine objects, they are in perfect sync with their chosen user, which is enhanced further by the fact that Renly is very skilled to begin with, so he can throw them and grab them perfectly as they return. But when they are thrown off balance by Kosogi, when Renly manages to grab them on his own, you can see his hand starts to bleed because he really just barely grabs them properly. It's one of those little neat minor details. And what he says to Kosogi should really highlight Renly's mental state to you. Renly still does not believe in himself, he still does not trust in himself. In fact, even before accidentally killing his friend, he never solely relied on himself in the first place, and that's why it was the double-winged blades that resonated with him when he was choosing his weaponry. It was said that these twin blades were once two birds who had lost their left and right wings respectively, but still managed to fly by relying on the soul wing of the other. That had been the entire life of Renly that he didn't remember. His friend and Renly always relied on each other and eventually had managed to reach the final round of the 4 Empire Unification tournament together. And while that event had left Renly scarred beyond life, he had still shared a connection with the two birds who had become these divine blades. And while Renly still considered himself a failure, he knew the double-winged blades were up to the task. And based on that knowledge alone, you can guess why he didn't go for perfect weapon control here and directly went over to memory release. Enhanced Armament Command activates the power of divine objects in a manner that is controllable by the user, whereas Release Recollection unleashes the power of the weapon that only can be controlled by the ones with the strongest will. But Renly didn't even want to control the blades, he didn't trust himself to control them in the first place. But he trusted the blades themselves, and thus he simply chose to use the memory release function in hopes of the weapons doing the trick on their own. After the scene, I just love how the twins are teasing Renly, especially with their nightly speech asking for orders and sarcastically saluting him. And for the last time, no, Fizel and Linel were never back there to kill or hurt Kirito. As mentioned in the previous explained, unlike how the anime portrayed the scene, the duo had taken permission from their commanding officer Sheeta the Silent to investigate the abnormality they saw in the left flank. They came to the back for the sole purpose of helping the squads. Anyways, moving on to the relatively disappointing second half. I have no clue why in this episode they decided to paint Berkuli's perfect weapon control red. It just looks a little silly, probably because it's nighttime and transparent blur would not be visible, but still, I hinted at this in the previous episode because they had actually teased at this in episode 6. You could clearly see a blurred area that was not the clouds up in the sky, very similar to the showcase of his perfect weapon control back during the Yu-Gi-Oh duel. What I'm more disappointed, however, is that they didn't build up to the scene at all in this episode. Like, yeah, the act was anticlimactic as fuck in the light novels as well, but it was still intense as hell because this scene was constantly being built up. Berkuli wasn't speaking much for a reason. The novels explicitly stated the toll this giant perfect weapon control was taking on him as he was having a hard time maintaining it for hours, etc. And for the Alice scene, okay, let me get the part that I really liked out of the way. Alice's realization about the souls of the humans and the Dark Territory residents being the same, that bit was very well adapted. However, the rest of the scene feels... oh, you've seen this description before from me. Empty. Just like Shasta going berserk back in episode 4, the tenseness is severely lacking. First off, reflecting luminous elements endlessly in a mirror ball. Yes, glad that the anime mentioned that bit, but like, that's only 1/3 of the explanation of why she did what she did. She could very well expanded the special resources in many other ways, but she needed not just to expand them to prevent the Dark Territory mages utilizing their dark arts, but also because she wanted to create a nuke out of all that energy. The next problem was that she could barely control 10 elements at once, as she was not as skilled as Chudelkin or Quinella, who could maintain control over dozens of elements, and she needed to handle hundreds if not thousands of elements at once to achieve what she was trying to achieve. but she had heard how Kirito reflected Fanatio's 7-piercing blade by utilizing a mirror, which had given her the idea to create a mirror ball and storing the special resources as luminous aka light elements inside this mirror ball to somewhat cheat the system. Alice at the end, realizing what she had done in this 5-second shot was neat, yeah, but what about everyone else? Why were all the reactions simply cut out in this scene? They could have easily shown a bunch of other gasping faces, etc. to show the magnitude of what just happened properly, but once again, just like they did countless times in Alicization, they only wanted to focus on the cool particle effects and light shows instead of properly focusing on the scene they're actually adapting. And at this point, the way they just want to hide everything behind flashy lights, it's getting more frustrating than pretty. We don't get to see the actual devastation despite them obviously knowing about the circumstances, adapting things like the color of the sky changing. What's preventing A1 from actually caring for the rest of the scene that is not about their particle engine? I'm starting to feel more and more like Alicization Anime is not an anime, but a tech demo for A1's particle engine at this point, which is a major shame in my opinion. But I guess that's a good time to segue into the opinions section. This episode had some marvelous animation, and let me count them for you. At the beginning, from the 19th second to the 49th second, we had a 30-second action scene with Fizel and Linel, and then from 9:37 to 10:20, a 43-second proper action sequence with Renly against the goblins. From the 12-minute mark, we had another gorgeous scene up until 13 minutes and 2 seconds. You, me, and many others praise these scenes as we are shocked by the quality and the fluidity of the animation. That is 135 seconds of good animation. Now, I don't like comparing SAO anime to the FGO anime because FGO is on a league of its own, but you know what they had this week? 14 minutes, 840 seconds of purely mesmerizing animation. That is about 7 times what SAO had this week, and I'm just pointing out these numbers to illustrate where the Alicization Anime has set its bar for animation standards. I'm not saying SAO doesn't have enough action, it does. I'm saying SAO is not animating anything outside of the bare minimum of their action scenes. I have been complaining about this for a very long time in small doses. Episode 1 of the War of Underworld was one of those examples, how the anime feels more like a PowerPoint slideshow with gorgeous visuals that barely move an inch. And this episode fits into that bill yet again. Where are those fluid, colorful and imaginative animations from Season 1, Season 2, Ordinal Scale? Aside from a couple seconds each week, and that is if we're lucky, the animation is so soulless in Alicization. I personally attribute this to the fact that they decided to stick with the Ordinal Scale art style, which is extremely detailed for a weekly anime production, and in my honest belief, this choice of theirs is completely ruining the imagination of the producers, because whatever creative stuff they come up with during production end up being too much of a work. So in the end, what we're left with is the bare minimum action creativity that is, yes, absolutely gorgeous, but a PowerPoint slideshow for every other scene out there. When Alicization Rising still has imaginative fight scenes and creative choreographies, the biggest anime project of the year should not be at a state where it's sticking to the bare minimum and establish a bar for overall mediocrity, where people are genuinely amazed when some decent fight choreography is featured in the show. That's really a shame. I speak with the community a lot. Here on my channel I do, as well as on SAO Reddit and SAO Wikia. Most people usually do praise an episode right after they watch it. They don't realize how stingy Alicization Anime is and how mediocre it is, because it's designed around to taint the audience with 30 seconds of coolness in a 20-minute episode. But the moment you remind them of the creativity that has been lost since the beginning of Alicization, it all becomes clear that they are only living a 2-day honeymoon period with the episode. Maybe that's fine, maybe they don't need to know, maybe they don't need to remember Asuna vs Yuki fight scene. Heck, not even the fight. Remember when the rudimentary animation was fluid and expressive rather than a PowerPoint slideshow? When things were interesting from an animation perspective rather than a photorealistic drawing that doesn't move an inch. I miss those days. And that's where I'm ending this video. I hope they completely scrap this art style and return to the old one when they're adapting Unit to Ring in over half a decade, because A1 obviously can't keep up with the amount of detail they have included for a weekly project. I want the SAO back that kept things interesting for the duration of an entire episode, rather than try to color my view with a small 30-second action sequence. Next episode is titled Blood and Life. There'll be stuff happening. If you made it this far, do comment 2 birds of the double winged blades to let me know. Ask your questions, weekly War of Underworld Q&A. Thanks for watching, thanks to all my patrons and channel members. Stay cool, see ya.